Hi. Okay, so we're going to get started. Good evening, and I am Sherri Manson, co-chair of the Critical Conversations in Urban Education Committee, along with Dr. Brian Smith. We want to welcome you and thank all of our distinguished guests, teachers, administrators, parents, students, and most especially our community friends. Tonight, our event is entitled Educational Technologies in a Time of Change in Urban Communities. This is CCUE's 10th installation in the Critical Conversations in Urban Education lecture series sponsored by Drexel's School of Education. CCUE was convened in 2012 and has established itself as an engaging lecture series for the thoughtful deliberation of issues in urban education. I would like to take a moment to thank the following people for offering their support, their ideas, talents, and most especially their time. This event would not have been possible without our Dean, Nancy Songer, the Critical Conversations in Urban Education Committee, and if we could take a moment for them, please, for them to stand and be acknowledged because they worked tremendously hard throughout the year. In addition to our committee, there is Rob Raspberry's team, who is from the Multimedia Technical Services. There's John Fars, who is from Event Services Technical Operations team. There's Ashley Flinnard. I think I pronounced her name correctly. She's from Chestnut Street Caterers. There's Jim Stollard from the Paper Chase at Chestnut Square, who does all our printing. There's Tristan Larito, who created all of our marketing collateral. There's IMS Technology Services, who's in the back of the room. There's Larry Kaiser, Eric O'Brien, and Philip Gillian. At this time, please join me in welcoming Dr. Nancy Songer. She's our Dean of the School of Education, who will give our opening remarks.
Good afternoon. All right. First of all, I want to thank Sherri Manson and the entire Critical Conversations in Urban Education Committee, sorry, it's been kind of a long day, for organizing this event tonight and for having such a great set of panelists, a great speaker, and such energy and dedication for this work for this year as has been true of all of our other years. I'd also like to thank our panelists who are with us tonight. First of all, Chris Lehman, who is the Assistant Superintendent of the Innovation Network for the School District of Philadelphia, and the founding principal and co-principal, I think, still, of the highly accomplished Science Leadership Academy High School, and a celebrated book author, and a very good friend of mine. Mr. Vasquez, one of our other panelists, is the president and CEO of Philadelphia Academies, Inc., a local organization whose mission is to expand life and economic options for Philadelphia public school students through career-focused programming that prepares young people for employment and post-secondary education. Thank you for being here. We also have as our panel moderator, Andy Stutzman, who is the program manager for digital on-ramps here at Drexel. Digital on-ramps places Philadelphians at the center of the workforce training system by connecting them with relevant programs, resources, and opportunities. It's a citywide collaborative that builds free online tools to help Philadelphians find careers, access training opportunities, and increase recognition of their skills and accomplishments. And Andy Stutzman is also a very important member of a National Science Foundation grant called Philly Scientist, where we are going to very soon have kids, 4th, 5th, and 6th graders from Philadelphia, tracking the biodiversity of the Philadelphia Promise Zone and providing their suggestions for solutions to biodiversity for Schuylkill Yards and other urban developments back to our city planners. So Andy, thank you for all of that good work you're doing on our team as well. We will get to our panel in a little bit, but first it's my honor to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Nicole Pinkard. Dr. Pinkard is currently an associate professor in the College of Computing and Digital Media at DePaul University in Chicago. She is also the founder of Digital Youth Network, the co-founder of Inquirium LLC, and Remix Learning, the home of iRemix, a social learning platform that connects youth's learning opportunities in school, home, and beyond. In collaboration with the Chicago Public Library, Dr. Pinkard also helped found U Media, a public learning space that immerses high school students in a context of traditional media, books, to make and produce new media artifacts like music, games, videos, and virtual worlds. And I go on. Dr. Pinkard is also the recipient, I'm sorry to embarrass you, Nicole, of a 2014 Northwestern University Alumni Award, a 2010 Common Sense Media Award for outstanding commitment to creativity and youth, and the 2004 Jan Hawkins Award for early career contributions to humanistic research and scholarship in learning technologies. She holds a BS in computer science from Stanford University, a Master's of Science in computer science, and a PhD in learning sciences from Northwestern University. Her current scholarly interests include the design of equitable learning ecosystems, the use of pedagogical-based social learning networks, computational making, and new media literacy learning environments, digital badging, computational making learning environments for underrepresented groups. She is also a good friend of mine that I've known for nearly 20 years, as we were both junior faculty, although I was less junior than she was, together at the University of Michigan. And so I have a real fondness for Nicole and a deep appreciation for her work. So please help me in welcoming her and all of our others to this session this evening.
Did she just tell my age? You said 20 years. So I'm really happy to be here. I have a little bit of cold, so hopefully I will not end up in a coughing situation. So let me get water ready in case it happens. Really happy to be here because it's also a reconnection with people I know. Nancy and I have known each other for a long period of time. I've known one person even longer from the first day of graduate school, Brian Smith, and we went on the journey of grad school together from day one to I think we even graduated right around the same important time. So really happy to be here. And so, and also been in at far sort of relationship with Philly, and as the work in Philly and trying to understand how do you create learning spaces for youth has sort of mirrored in some sense what we've been trying to do in Chicago, and we've always seen Philly as the sort of partner in crime. So really happy to be here and to hear about all the things that are going on. So this conversation is going to be around EdTech in the time of change, and really looking at some of the work we're trying to do about thinking about infrastructures, learning infrastructures, and making sure that our infrastructures are supporting equitable learning. And I'm going to talk through a journey of how our work has gone, and in some sense, as we've taken on project after project, the questions that we need to, the questions that have arisen have challenged us to explore new and bigger things. So I'm going to do this in time, and I know Sherri's going to hold me accountable for time, so I'm going to try to do this. So first I want to, did this go right? Okay, yep. So first, I want to start just by recognizing that while we oftentimes think about school when we say learning, we focus on school. In reality, most of the time that we spend learning is not in the school day. If this is a graphic, a representation that comes out of the Life Center out of Washington, but really sort of paints a very real and clear picture that only 18% of our time is spent in formal learning environments during the K-12, and so much other time is spent outside of it. So if we're really trying to think about how do we support learning, we have to think about the intersection of formal and informal. And in today's age, we have access to technologies that can make that happen. I mean, I grew up in Kansas, and for me in a small town, Girl Scouts, campfire, sports, all of that was connected because everyone knew each other. But what does that mean in cities like Philly and Chicago? How do you can make that connected learning? And I think the technology is allowing us to come back to some of those questions. And so if you think about learning as across all these, informal and formal, then you have to begin to think about not education, but learning. And to think about, well, then what are the affordances of all the different spaces where we spend our time? Because every place is different. School has some affordances that home doesn't have, and communities and things like that. So for our work, we're always trying to take a learning ecologies framework, which is a framework where another partner in crime, Bridget Barron, has put forward that really says for anything we want to teach, let's be intentional about thinking about how we connect in the home school, after school, and things like that. And so in that work and thinking about our work, I lead an organization, or really it's a program, called the Digital Youth Network. And at the core, this is what we try to do. We're really trying to think about designing learning systems, ecosystems that ensure all youth, especially the underserved, cultivate the critical skills and literacy that are going to be necessary for them to have agency in their life. And so over the period of time that we've been doing this work, in 12 years, the definition of critical literacy has changed. We started out focusing much more on digital literacies because at that time the digital technologies were available to everyone. But now if we think about computational literacies, it is possible that we now have to think about every kid should know how to think of, even if they're not a coder, they need to understand code. And so for us, the concept of literacy changes as the technologies are changing in our life. So if this is our goal and we think about a learning framework, a learning ecologies framework, how do we make this to bear? So over 3 years, I'm not going to talk about these projects, but just to give you a context of where I'm going to go. We first started off focusing on work in one school, a school with 75 kids. Chris would appreciate that. School with just 75 kids, and similar to some of the work that Drexel's about to do with is having its own school, working at the University of Chicago, so we had our own charter school. So in that, I had one hat on as being the lead of all the technology, and the other hat on as a researcher. So you have this nice intersection of having to make things work. And so we really focused on how do we create these digital literacies, an environment that supports digital literacies. But in that sense, we were dealing with kids that all went to a charter school, so we were able to keep everything within the school day. And we were able, after a period of time, to have our kids have the same literacies or have more digital literacies than a comparable set of kids from Silicon Valley. That work moved, and we began to say, well, what happens when they graduate from middle school? And they all went to 25 different high schools. So we then focused on the work in UMedia, which there's a lot of similar work that's here. That's really about where are spaces in libraries that you can reposition in ways that high schoolers would find them as desirable places. And so the work we did in UMedia, I think, has been replicated across multiple different places. But what that taught us and what the challenge out of that work was, even though we had a 5,000 square foot space, that space could still only hold a couple of, 100 kids at a time when we're talking about 400,000 kids in the district. So we had to begin to say, you can't just be place-based. We have to begin to think about how we network together learning opportunities. So in 2013, at the support of MacArthur Foundation, we launched something called City of Learning. I think you have a variant of that here called LRNG. But the original one was in Chicago called City of Learning, which really was the mayor's initiative designed to say, how can we document all the out-of-school learning that takes place in the city, and in the way of documenting it, hold ourselves accountable for providing equity. But with that work, and particularly with the City of Learning work, one of the things we really realized is that oftentimes as providers, we know if we have 30 kids in our class, we're like, oh, our class is full. We often don't know about the other hundreds of thousands of kids who aren't participating. But the City of Learning work made it very clear to us that many kids weren't participating. And so for us, the focus changed from creating a great program to really trying to understand the factors that influence participation. And so what I'm going to talk about now is some of the things we're trying to do to really try to hone in on factors that influence, inhibit participation in informal learning. And some of those, of course, intrinsic. Are you aware, your prior history, availability or opportunities available, opportunities, and are they engaging? Accessible, the cost, transportation, perceived safety and perceived comfort. One of the interesting things about the work we did in UMedia is when we were asked to do it, I never thought that we would be, to be honest, that we would be successful opening up a digital space in the library, that high schoolers were going to come to the library downtown. Because I just didn't think that it would be perceived as the place to go. But the reality is libraries are the one place where kids are used to going multiple times. So they're okay with going to the library. They have habits of going to the library multiple times. That's what you do with kids. So it became a place that it became comfortable and a place that students would go to. And then the other thing that's interesting about the library is that you don't have to stay. So if the programming is not good, if it's not engaging, they can get up and go. But if you register for a program, most likely you're not going to get up in the middle of your video making class and leave. And then the outcomes. One of the biggest things that we all have to hold ourselves accountable is what's the perceived utility of what we're trying to teach. What's the perceived from an academic standpoint, from a social standpoint, and then from a family currency. How is what we're asking kids to engage in, how is it producing outcomes? I'm going to go past this one. So in thinking about this work, I've always, I love basketball, I love sports, and I was trying to understand what's sticky about sports, what's sticky about music? What is it that those environments create that keep you going back and doing this? And particularly in the urban context that many of us are working with. And if you think about it, it's a system and an ecosystem. In any basketball court, in any, if you're in a, I wasn't in a band, I played piano, but if you were in a band, there's first chair, second chair. You're always knowing what you're trying to get. So there's always an opportunity to spectate, to see who's doing what. There's an opportunity to practice. You can perform and you can level up. And because it's always in front of you, there's always a motivation to get better. You have access to peers, mentors, and things like that. So, but if we ask ourselves, where does this model exist if we think about how we teach reading, math, and things like that? I know Chris has done some of that and has done a lot of that in his schools. And so our concept is how do we explore this and think about this for what it means if we're trying to create in our communities STEM, healthy STEM ecosystems. How can you spectate on watching other kids create code, create robots? Where can you practice? Can you, in Chicago, there's 38 basketball courts in one community. There's only one makerspace in that same community. So where can you practice? Right, and so we have to begin to hold ourselves accountable. And I believe some of what I've heard you talk about, what you're about to do here in the schools and with the community center and things like that Drexel has, you are creating a campus-like approach to be able to bring some of that together. So I'm going to give you an example of a program that we try to create that is trying to bring this together. And this is a program targeting middle school girls. We call it the Digital Youth Divas. And we all know, and the data tells us, that if a middle school with any, particularly kids of color, but also if girls do not engage in informal STEM learning in the middle school grades, regardless of how well they do in school, in college courses, they're not going to major in college. So we had to think of how do we design programs that are designed and engaging to girls. And the interesting thing here is I'm probably not the person to design this program. I learned to code in 7th grade. I liked it. It worked for me. So me thinking about a program designed for me probably is not going to be the best design program for others. So we intentionally, why we call it, if those who know me, probably diva is not the term that, I don't know, Brian, don't speak. It's not necessarily the term that I would use, but we said let's intentionally design a program that's targeting girls who won't come in saying, I want to do STEM. So what Divas is a program that's face-to-face after school and on Saturdays, has its own online social network. We create a series of narratives that are video-based, comic book-based, that are designed around a virtual set of digital divas who are in middle school, who are engaging everyday challenges about friendship, around all kinds of different things. So I'll tell you an example of one in a second, where they're having to use STEM to solve the problem. And they're also having to engage and talk about the issues that normally engage girls. And so they're getting an example. So if you think of sometimes you can't be what you don't see, they're getting to see it modeled, and then they're actually doing it themselves. They engage in a lot of hands-on project work. And actually, you have Yasmin Confai and stuff are doing some of the same exact project work that they're doing. We're doing it just with a different sort of context. And then we use mentors, and it's intentional. One of the interesting things here is we intentionally use high school, college mentors, and actually some high school mentors, not scientists, because from a replicable standpoint, we need a program that anyone can implement. And so we try to use mentors who connect. And then, of course, they have peers. So here's a quick video. I'm going to just show a snippet of it so you can get a feel of what the program looks like. I was going to show you a video. Okay, here we go. So you can feel what it is. So pretty much, because the sound's not coming out, I'll explain what it is. So this is an example of what the scenario is. So every session there's a video scenario that situates what the problem is. And this particular one, I think there two girls are engaging in a are having. Yeah, let me just. There we go.
Can take what she learned at her digital youth camp and put it within her work outside of camp. Maybe we can do the same thing.
I'm going to try to make a card for our special days for people and use color and then explain it to them. This week we helped out Roshana by making more lights and colors in her design.
Rashana's circuitry design has been stolen, and the divas have to help her out. So for them to mirror the story, they have to learn circuitry first.
I'm doing a parallel circuit. I'm making series circuit.
We show them the different components to make a working circuit.
If you understand it, it's pretty easy.
It's really cool because they're having a blast.
I like seeing things light up.
So you hear all that beeping?
Yep.
This one has, so they're using multimeters.
I'm trying to detect energy from objects in the room.
They know what makes their LEDs light up, so they get it. So today we're going to end with a good grasp on our circuitry. Next week we're going to incorporate that into our designs.
So we'll keep going, and then what they end up with is making their own e-textiles and things like that. But right now, to show how the work continues, they're entering a contest where they have to, it's a slideshow back. Oh, here we go. Is it still in slideshow mode? Yeah, it is. Okay. They have to, they're trying to create a solution that uses sensors to support folks who are blind and crossing the street. So they've come up with this original idea to have a cuff that has a sensor that signals, adds a blue light to the traffic light, so when you come across the area, the blue light comes on that signals to drivers. So in some sense, we try to do a series of these small, simple projects. You're looking at a color wheel that, over time, if they stay in the project, it levels up to projects that are meaningful to them. I won't go through in this and what the project looks like, but what they also do is end up with a whole portfolio of their particular work. Now, in some sense, it's great. We've created a project, but what happens after they come out of Divas? One of the things we've looked at in trying to understand the value of the program is how does mentoring happen? So in the program, you have a program mentor who's a college student who sort of can connect with you. You then have online mentors who can really correct your scientific understanding if you have a problem, and then sometimes you can have some specialists. And what we've seen when we look at the social network data coming out of this is across all the different cohorts, we actually see students being very intentional about reaching out to mentors. So the mentor in the middle is an online mentor who the students are constantly connecting with to try to get feedback on the work and the work that they've done. So we're trying to look at, make sure that we're developing knowledge, the kids, their knowledge, conceptual knowledge and understanding is happening. Their perceptions about computing and engineering is being impacted, and whether they're developing an interest in STEM. And so that's some of the work we're looking at. I'm not going to go into the details of the finding right now, but I do want to show you one example of a case study. So this is a young woman who we've been working with for multiple years, public school, has done some prior work with digital, but if you talk to her about her, this is a technobiography that a colleague, Bridget Barron, has created, you can see that all of a sudden in the 5th grade year, she started doing these particular digital projects. And these are her words talking about it. If she's developing a maker identity, the teacher, she talks about her work to the teacher in her classroom who understands what she's doing. And then the teacher is the one who suggested that she join the program, the stuff. Then she created her mood flowers. Sorry about that, it didn't transfer over right. When she created her project, she took it back into the school. The teachers found that those were interesting, and then that helped to develop her sense of identity in the school. And now she's known as someone who does making. And the teacher has given that to the science teacher, and now she has more of a sense of identity, and that she now is going out into community and doing these designs for others. So the question is, how can these technologies make, so that's great, that's one program, but there's only so many girls who are doing that. So are there some inequities in the learning opportunities that we can do? So part of what we then did, and I put city name here, is, well, we're able to only work with 30 girls in a year. Are these opportunities available to others? So the question we want to ask is, does your city, does Chicago, does Philadelphia, I did not say Pittsburgh, I apologize. Does Chicago have an equitable ecology of learning opportunities? And these are some of the questions we were asking. How do neighborhoods differ with respect to diversity? How accessible are programs? How redundant? And we partnered with a colleague at University of Colorado, Bill Penwell and Tammy Sumner, to look at the data that we had from our City of Learning system to begin to explore this. And so we partner in Chicago's City of Learning. There's over 200 organizations that have put their programs in the system, which means we have all the geolocation data from that. And I don't really need to go because you understand what the platform is. You have a program database where all your offerings are. You have a badge database of, and then you have a set of online activities. So far in Chicago, 133,000 kids have been on the platform. 274,000 badges have been awarded. and this is the profile that students have. But if you look very closely, what you'll see, the top picks, the recommendations around coding, and this is an example of a portfolio for one of the digital divas, almost everything is an online challenge, right? There aren't the physical programs for girls to go to. And so in looking at that data, we said, we have to think differently about how we begin to add programs because we just can't make it all available online. And so in that sense, and if we really aggregate the data, we see that in Chicago, 85% of all summer programs are sports related. Only 1.4% are coding and games. Why is that? Because Chicago is the city of parks. We have a park in every particular neighborhood, and kids spend their summer in the parks. So this data probably isn't different from any other city. What's different is the ability to visualize it, and then to begin in City of Learning is the mayor's initiative, that then we're holding ourselves accountable for that. So at that point, we also know what kids are searching for. So if we see that 85% of the programs are sports related, but we see that kids are searching for what they want to do is math, coding, and things like that, we know we have an imbalance. And so in doing this, we came up with this framework of thinking about learning deserts. And there's three things we look at for any community. Abundance, what are the unique number of program opportunities in the zip code? What's the richness, the distinct number of types of programs? And then the evenness. So you might have basketball, you might have sports, and you might have coding, but or do you have equal number of both? So this is a framework that we then look across our programs in the city. And when we see the darker the better, the lighter, more problematic, we see that there is some inequity across the city. And I'm going to dive into one particular area coding to give you more of an example of what that means. And so what this also looks like in terms of program abundance from wealthier districts, so in 24, the red are the more wealthier communities, the blue are the lower socioeconomic. You see the difference in program abundance that exists, and the gap is getting higher. So again, this is, I'm sure Chicago is not like anyone else, but we can see it, and we have to hold ourselves accountable. So, and again, diving into coding, in 2014, the darker, that's where the coding programs were, 2014, 2015, 2016, there were some reasons related to why fewer programs were in 2016. That's been addressed. But what you see is all the programs are downtown. Why do you think all the programs are downtown? Where would all the coding programs be here? If you were to map Philly, where would they be? Because this is where your universities are, right? This is downtown is where all our universities are. So reality, if you want to learn to code in the summer in Chicago, you got to be able to get downtown. We don't have, it's $5 a day on bus fare. So we might have the programs, but if you really look at the equitable distribution of them, we don't. So that became a challenge and a problem that we had to solve. And in addition, another one, the last one to show you, is that we also can look at it by how long it takes to get there. So because the transportation is different, in some areas you can just take the subway, in other ways you have to walk and take the bus. So you might physically be closer, but because you have to walk, take the bus, and take the subway, is actually further apart. So now we have the ability to look at where any kid lives in the program to see really what are the number of steps. And this has really caused us to now hyper-focus on how do we focus on putting programming in the community for middle school kids, because it's not realistic that a middle school kid is going to walk a half a mile, get on the bus, get off the bus, get on the subway to get to a program. I wouldn't put my child on that. So we can't. So just because the programs exist doesn't mean that they're equitable. So a solution that we've tried is a mobile van. So we have 2 mobile vans that really we take, we bring code on the road. I know that's a little cheesy. I know the name is cheesy, but what it is really a series of computers, laptops, mentors, college students who go to school sites and do coding-related activities. In the summer, we do camps. And we also work with aldermen to do a lot of events. So we have two labs that are constantly on the road being scheduled to try to take coding to those communities where they are. So we use those maps and say this is where we need opportunities. We've also taken the same City of Learning, which is you think of as informal, and worked with the city to take our CS for All initiative and to really focus on helping schools understand how they can embed it into the curriculum. So this is a page where they can go and say, let's do this particular work. How many did y'all do hour of code? Did people do hour of code? We did a hour of code challenge where the city challenged everyone to do some learning. Now here's what it looks like. This is a map of all the hours of code from the site, and what we see, and schools did not necessarily do it in the school, so we got 19,000 hours in we were trying to get to 20. We didn't actually, we missed about 400 hours, not happy about that. But what we actually begin to see is the natural patterns of where coding-related activities are going. And this has enabled us, again, working with our funders to say, you know, in some of these areas, nothing's taking place. We need to really think about sending the mobile van here. We don't need to send the mobile van here because we already have some learning taking place. So we're beginning to work with the aldermen and folks to begin to understand how we use data and how do we use our understanding of where youth live to make some more different opportunities. So where this is coming together now in our project is we're saying, okay, well, let's take responsibility for taking a community similar like what you're doing here in West Philly and say we're going to create a network of informal learning opportunities to ensure that 50% of the youth in this one community of 2,100 students are engaged in STEAM enrichment weekly. So what does that look like? And our goal is that we can't assume that the schools have to do it. And so in that model, we first went, this is an example of the basketball courts. We first said how many basketball courts are there in the community. And given where all the basketball courts are, these are parks, let's go talk to the parks and figure out can we do sort of side-by-side learning here. And also then how do we talk to the aldermen and folks and to sort of make them realize that they have to give us spaces to provide learning, which we have now. And then we came back to this model and we said now let's really articulate what this is going to mean in our community. And so what it looks like then is home. We're figuring out what are the activities at home. They use the online network at home. At school, we do the CPS Connects classes. In the community centers, they have access to the City of Learning. And if you think about our playground, then are these U-media spaces where kids can go in and play. And so in the city, we have the community schools, we have art centers, we have the mobile van, and then we have this intentional maker labs. That all the kids, the kids in these middle schools, there's 6 middle schools, are bused. We pick them up on a yellow bus and bring them around to the programming each and every day. What that has done then, the other part of our model is we give parents the ability to approve program partners who come in. So they get to decide who comes in. We transport kids, as I said, in the yellow bus, but we also are sending messages to parents that, yes, your kid made it here because we live not necessarily in the safest area. We recognize badges that kids have earned, and right now we're working to push it out doing like the like how many of you have the neighborhood watch software? You get something do you ever get told anything good? You get something that says, okay, someone done broke in, right? Like, why can't we use the same system report something good? So we're saying, well, why don't, when kids earn badges, why don't we push to the badge in the community that they're in, so-and-so earned a badge in this. Of course, if the kid and the parent are willing that to happen. So now you're not only looking at, oh, okay, I don't want to open up, next door. It's like next door neighbor or something like that because it's bad. It might actually be something positive. So simple ways of trying to say, how do we just use the technical infrastructure it is to sort of bring more connective, positive tissue in between people. And so what the program model looks like is on Mondays we do girls-only programming because we don't want to be in a situation where girls are competing against, like, oh, you go to the Divas program or you have to go to robotics. So Monday is girls only. Tuesday we go into the schools and we do coding in the schools. Wednesday is more arts day, but they have glass blowing, painting and drawing, footwear and apparel, silk screening, 3D design, microcontrollers. And then Thursday is much more around the STEM. So you might have a kid who's here 4 days. You might have a kid who's here 2 days. You might have a kid who's here 1 day. But in all, we're able to service a lot of kids. So our data just in this. So one of the questions, if we go back to participation, was if you provide opportunities, was a population of students engaged? Because one of the questions has been there hasn't been a market. We don't have programs because there's not a market, or is there because we don't have the programs, we don't have engagement. So which one comes first? And what we've been able to see in this first year, we've hit our numbers. So in terms of the slots filled, we started off with 240. We had to cap it at 360 for this pilot. We just didn't have enough slots. The students we had, and more students are doing more than one. 75% of the students who actually registered, when parents registered, actually completed the waivers, and then we've had a 96% retention rate. And so we're getting kids to engage and things like that. So then the question for us becomes, how are we then using this information to connect it back into the schools? And so for us, okay, sorry for all the. So for us then, we're really now coming back and talking with the district and saying, okay, these things work. How do we really think about what this means for all the stakeholders? So how do we make sure that the youth are getting their portfolios and recommendations that now summer jobs can be based off of the badges that you earn. So for instance, you shouldn't probably get a job at the park if you never attended the park. Right, so those summer jobs for the park should go to kids who have been there some particular part of time. Given the park is something that everyone can go to. The school has now gives badges for service learning credit. So students can get credit for what they do in out-of-school learning for service learning. We're also going to pilot getting credit for coding for programs that you do outside of school. But these are only for programs where organizations have passed a certain level of expectation. The city, the mayor is holding the civic agencies accountable for having certain levels of participation. And funders are beginning to look at the data and say, hey, we will only I'm not going to put another coding program downtown because I see where the limitations are. And providers are now getting their own data about, who are they serving? Where are their kids coming from? Now they get to see, X% of my kids come from my particular community. So what we believe we're doing is developing a common language and a way for the community begin to have the same set of data to tackle the problems that exist. So you can have this infrastructure, that doesn't mean that you've solved the equity problems. What you do is have the infrastructure that can tell you, in some ways, the actions you're taking, are they helping the problem? Or are they not addressing the problem? So in that sense, I'm going to stop. But really, hopefully this can help tee up some of the conversations and the questions that I know we have. Thank you. Is there a slide you just want me to shut it? Just shut it.
Thank you, Dr. Pinker. Good evening. My name is Ayana Allen Handy. I'm a member of the CCUE Program Committee, and I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator and our panelists that are going to join Dr. Pinker this evening. I'll begin with Andy Stutzman. Mr. Andy Stutzman is the Program Director for Digital On-Ramps. Digital On-Ramps, DOR, is an innovative workforce development program created by a Drexel University-based collaboration of 13 agencies and employers. DOR is committed to improving training and employment services in Philadelphia by creating 21st century skills for workforce agencies and job seekers. Mr. Stutzman is working with DOR to champion the use of digital badges to help job seekers better represent their skills, competencies, and accomplishments with employers and post-secondary opportunities. Mr. Stutzman came to Drexel in 2012 to lead the web development work for the KeySpot Public Computing Project, which continues to offer over 50 public computer labs and provide digital literacy training throughout Philadelphia. Mr. Stutzman has managed multiple technical projects throughout his career, including campus-wide web development and instructional technology initiatives, developing a university-wide campus portal platform, and leading the integration and development of enterprise systems. He has an MS in Computer Information Science from LaSalle University and over 20 years of experience working in higher education. So can we welcome Mr. Andy Stutzman, our moderator. Our first panelist is Chris Lehman. Mr. Chris Lehman is currently the Assistant Superintendent of the Innovative Network with the School District of Philadelphia. He is also the founding principal of the Science Leadership Academy, a progressive science, inquiry-driven, project-based, one-to-one laptop school that is considered one of the pioneers of the School 2.0 movement. The school was recognized by Ladies' Home Journal as one of the 10 most amazing schools in the U.S. and has been recognized as an Apple Distinguished School from 2009 through 2013. In September 2013, Mr. Lehman opened another SLA at Bieber campus. Also in 2013, he co-founded the nonprofit Inquiry Schools to help more schools create empowering modern learning experiences for students. Mr. Lehman is the 2014 winner of the McGraw Prize in Education. In June 2013, he was named Outstanding Leader of the Year by the International Society of Technology in Education. In November of 2012, He was named by Dell's Inspire 100 as one of the 100 people changing the world using social media. In September of 2011, Mr. Lehman was honored by the White House as a champion of change for his work in education reform. He received his BA in English, an MA in English, and an MA, he received his BA in English Literature from the University of Pennsylvania, and his MA in English Education from Teachers College, Columbia University. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Lehman. And our next panelist is Jay Vasquez. Mr. Jay Vasquez was named President and CEO of Philadelphia Academies, Inc. in January 2017, and in that capacity is responsible for the overall strategic and operational direction of the organization. Prior to being named President and CEO, Jay served at PAI for 7 years, the majority of which he held the role of Director of School Operations. In his own words, "My philosophy as a leader is quite simple. It is never about me, but the young people, the schools, and the communities that we serve. My mission is to be their voice and champion." As a strategic planner, change agent, and thought leader, he brings his passion and expertise to PAI every day with the expectation of achieving positive results for the young men and women we serve in Philadelphia. Prior to joining PAI, Mr. Vasquez had a very successful career in several diverse business sectors, where he served as a transformative leader with a proven track record of implementing system-wide changes that led to positive outcomes. His work with foundations, government agencies, and education institutions throughout the United States has made him an ardent believer that education, industry involvement, and civic engagement are the catalysts for improving the lives of young people. Mr. Vasquez holds a BA in Economics and Labor Studies from Queens College City University of New York. So please join me in welcoming Jay Vasquez.
Let us write our own bios, you know, it just goes on. Well, thank you all for being here today. I hope we can have a great conversation for you all, and that you can join us as well. I appreciate you all coming out, and for everyone that's online as well, this is great. So, hi to everyone online. I'm privileged to moderate this panel with everyone here, with all these credentials too. You know, it's great to be here on stage. So I'll be starting the conversation off with a few questions, and after a little while, we'll actually ask for questions from the audience as well. So as we're talking, start thinking of some questions, because we'd love to have that interaction with you as well. So to make the evening a little more interesting, though, I've asked our panelists to respond with questions using interpretive dance and spoken word tonight. So if you guys are ready for that, if you use haikus, you get extra points. So we're keeping score. So.
I'm really good.
Yeah, sure. Salsa, yeah. Well, to get those questions started, we're going to talk about some of the equity issues that Nicole had mentioned as well. Could you begin the discussion by first defining the word equity and how it impacts the professional environment you currently work in?
Use back of page if necessary. See, now you've got me trying to do that in a haiku, and so I'm completely... I mean, it's funny because it's a great question because it gets thrown around, like the term gets thrown around a lot, and a lot of time it tends to, like, whoever wants to disagree with anything you're trying to do throws the word equity up there. And, you know, and that is challenging, and so I think it actually is a good idea to have a working definition of it. And, you know, it's interesting for me, I was in a very wealthy suburban New York school district earlier this week that asked me to come up and talk to them a little bit. And, you know, they were trying to tell me all the reasons they couldn't do inquiry and they couldn't do project-based learning and they couldn't, you know, do all of this work. And they, you know, and the principal of the high school said to me, I've got 1,500 students and only 150 teachers. And I was like, that's double my ratio, equity. So, you know, it was fascinating to me. So for me, it's about, I think for me, equity is about what are the resources at your disposal. And one of the things that I find really fascinating is that I look at spaces like Philadelphia where in the places that are doing the most powerful work, every last thing you have is written hard and hung up wet, right? I mean, like, there is not, you walk into these places that the place is vibrant and there's more duct tape holding together what is being used, and and sometimes because it's old, but also just because everything is used, right? And so for me, and then you go to these other places and they sit there and say, oh, well, we can't for this reason or that reason, and you look around and like stuff is still shrink wrapped. So for me, equity is about what is your access to resources. Human resources, technological resources, physical resources. I mean, it drives me insane that, as the person who oversees new school development in Philadelphia, the first thing anybody says to me is, well, if you want to do another new school, Chris, you better find a school building that has a couple floors, free or whatever, because we've got an $8 billion facilities shortfall. So yeah, we want to do new school models. Yeah, we want to do all the stuff, but good luck to you. And maybe we've got 4 classrooms for you somewhere in a wing that isn't being used. So access to all of those resources, human, technological, facility, all of that.
I have to agree. We started working with career academies in 1969, where students are on a personalized small learning community. And we used to work with a pocket of students, and we call them pocket academies. So in a school of 1,500 students, we were serving maybe 300 or 400 students, and but not serving all of the students. And for us, if we were really going to be equitable, it's not about equality, but it's about access. It's about choice. It's about options. So we decided if we were going to do this, and we're going to do it with fidelity, we were going to offer the same options and choices to all students in a school, or we weren't going to do it. And so we challenged the school district that we wanted to have all academy high schools. And that meant that every student would be in a personalized career academy for 3 years starting at 10th grade. And the way I describe it when I talk to funders and folks at the school district or anybody who will listen is that imagine inviting 10 young people out to dinner, but you only feed 3 of them. The other 7 get to watch. Equity to me is about all 10 get an option to choose from the menu and get to eat and drink and have dessert. So for us, for the longest time, we were only serving a very small population. So equity really is about leveling the playing field, and my choice and Chris' choice might be very different, but the real key is that we have a choice.
I would add to that, and I just recently saw this great visual. I wish I had it about equity versus equality, and in that sense, where equality means we're all going to have the same thing, but if we start off in different places, then you still might. We're going to end up in different places. Equity means I have to be willing to address why we're starting in different places, but then not force us down the same path, right? Because we're still possibly different. So how do we have multiple different pathways, allow for choice, but also make sure that people are aware and perceive their choice, and that the choices are designed within the context of their realities and their culture and their context, because oftentimes we can create choices, but there aren't the choices for others. So the equity, equality can be very challenging when you believe that you know where you want someone to go, and you want to move them down that pathway, but in reality, you have to give them the choice, but have accessible options to be able to go there. And also means we have to probably have a diversity in timelines too. So it doesn't, we might get there in different times.
Yeah, and I often think of that chart you have where the lines are kind of still growing. You get that gap, even though there's more opportunity out there, online coding classes, online tools out there, more STEM opportunities out there. A lot of times, people in certain communities don't have the option to actually take advantage of those opportunities based on their lifestyle. They may have to take care of a sick parent. They may have to help support that family. They don't have the options, or they don't have the internet access, obviously. You get the digital divide that's there, and they don't have the option to take advantage of those opportunities as well.
I would say the one thing, I think the one example with the bus, which was very enlightening to us, when we said, okay, well, let's just look at the distance. And then, fortunately with the colleagues from Colorado, they said, no, let's bring in let's get the Google data, how it gets there. And then you realize that I can actually be a mile away and you're 3 miles away. You're actually closer because you can just get on the subway and I'm further apart. And that's information that we normally don't know. And so when we look at why aren't kids coming to our programs, we might not actually be as aware that, the distance is not just about distance, it's also about transportation options. And oftentimes that's the inequity in our infrastructures that exist in the community, that we then have to understand those inequities and then build around them to create equity in some ways.
So let's turn this on its head a little bit. A lot of times when we think technology around education, we're thinking the students all the time as well. So when we think about technology, what about the teachers? What kind of technology do we have out there for teachers? What's changing for teachers right now for them to help better address these kind of issues with students, whether it's out-of-school programs or in-school programs?
I know we're using Connect That Studios, developed in California by Connect That in California. They do linked learning. And one of the things I really like about the platform they've developed is where teachers can develop, and Chris mentioned this project-based learning, cross-curricular project-based learning. And in our schools, because we have teaching teams and they have common students, they get to develop these really cool projects, but sometimes they can't identify partners, business partners. So they're able to get on this platform and design a project and then recruit business partners that we reach out to. And then the business partners will work with the teachers. And sometimes a teacher, we have a biotechnology academy, for instance, and a teacher didn't have an idea for how to start a project-based learning opportunity for kids in 10th grade. So she reached out to the business community that works within that industry, and they came up with some really great project-based learning ideas. And between the teachers and the industry partner, they were able to do this online. And of course, the industry partner came to the school as well. But what was really cool was that the students could demonstrate their projects online, and the business partner would annotate or make comments on the students' projects, and then the teachers would see the comments first to make sure that the comments were appropriate, and that, before they passed them on to the students. But that's one great way that we're using technology to bring the community and the business industry partners into the schools without necessarily having to bring those partners physically into the school. Sometimes it's just impossible.
So I think one of the ways in which we're using technology is less about the teacher on the tech, but it's actually enabling them to have an understanding of what kids are doing in other places, and allow them to partner with, as you were saying, with experts, or partner with the after-school providers. And so that is more collective work, and even partnering with the parents in terms of, we can now send information. You can know what kids are doing in a particular place. Let's bring in your portfolio and let's begin to see it. And also then by having access. I've seen some really interesting new sets of projects around virtual field trips, and with people being able to have experts who, that's what they do. They sit at home and they do a video conference from this classroom and that classroom and this classroom. It's actually really interesting. The other thing I think is what we haven't done a good enough job is that we're going to have to, if we really want teachers to use some of these technologies, is the data dashboards, or the visualizations of the learning that's taking place in these personalized ways that then teachers can figure out what to do, because if everything is online, and now how do I understand what's going on? I think we're a long way away from having representations and visualizations that are written in a way that they're actionable for teachers and leaders to know how to deal with personalized learning.
And yet, yes, and I think perhaps, what I worry about in the space right now is that there's a lot of energy and a lot of time and, good God, goo-gobs of money being spent trying to perfect the assessment, right? And not enough time being spent helping teachers develop the ability to help kids craft meaningful experiences. And I think where credentialing, for example, and badging has its most powerful impact is in capturing skills that have long gone uncaptured by school. But I look at all of the energy, like if we just get the perfect writing, the perfect writing competencies, if the perfect social studies competencies, the perfect science competencies, and what that is truly missing on some level is human motivation, and not just kid motivation, but human motivation. That what makes us excited is not that we get a badge or we get to prove that our competency level has gone up, but that we've done meaningful stuff, right? And so how we use the technology, whether it's by partnering, whether it's by breaking down, by making the classrooms permeable membranes that the world can come in and out of, whether it's being able to bring in real, like experts in their fields through, Google Hangout or what have you, whether it's helping teachers see the power of what happens when kids become authentic voices in the world by publishing their own work. That, to me, is where I want to see more energy spent. And what I worry about in the space a lot is with the competency model schools kind of on the rise, or that model being sort of the latest and greatest, fascination, is there's too much energy spent on assessment, which feels very much like a political problem people are trying to solve and not the human educational problem.
So here's a follow-up question to that. If you're connecting to bringing experts into the classroom or from the field, or connecting teachers to after-school programs, is that a grassroots movement between teacher and a program or a person, or do you have to get school-wide buy-in, the district buy-in to do some of that work? Or how does?
Yes, both.
Yes, it's both.
I mean,
Okay.
that's it. Yeah, right. I mean, that's obviously what we want is top-down support for bottom-up growth, right? So we don't want the martyr school, the martyr teacher who is expending mountains of energy to build these programs without people to coordinate it, without people to collaborate with, turning the whole thing on its own, doing the whole thing on its own. What we want is for the larger systems to recognize this and figure out how to support it, not dictate, not mandate, but support. And big systems struggle with that concept. So I think that would be my answer.
We do it at we're trying to do more hyper-local work, but we want to aggregate it to understand what's going on, the patterns across the city. So what we would do in Bronzeville is different than what I would do in Pilsen, and different what I would do in the North Side, because there's different partners, there's different needs, there's different expertise. And you can't go into every community and say, now you're going to become a STEM community. It has to be, in one, we're sitting right next to Bronzeville, sitting right next to where Obama's going to do the library. So, of course, we're going to have some civic, and we're right next to the DeSable Museum. That's going to be a very different type of way in which how we bring STEM into that community versus over someplace else where we're sitting right on the river. So I think, how do we make sure that you allow the contextualization, but having some set of expectations, and then that's where the systems come into play that make it easier for people to access what the opportunities are. You just can't put it on one thing I'm constantly saying, you just cannot add something else to teachers. So we have to be figuring out how to lessen their load and make things easier and more accessible to them.
So on that note, if a teacher has finds some technology they find really useful and they want to use it in their class, what is your best recommendation for using that? Kind of growing that program.
I want to take a jump at that question. I do too, and I want to be careful what I say here. So here's a challenge I have. We have a lot of companies coming into the education space that haven't been in the education space, and they're introducing a lot of technology. But what they're not doing is spending a lot of R&D dollars in education space and in terms of professional development, right? So if we're going to work with teachers using technology, we have to make certain that the teachers have plenty of professional development and time and supports. So they need to know how to use that technology. They need to learn how to embed that technology within their curriculum, and they also need to be taught how to teach students how to use that technology. Because too many times I see development companies, they don't spend enough time understanding the landscape, and our teachers are really overwhelmed in many of our urban schools, right? So that's one set of challenges that they have to overcome, as well as the lack of time for planning. You need to identify champions. The champions at the school district level, the champions at the school level, the principal. Does the principal support this initiative? Is the principal going to provide supports? And does the teacher have ample time? You cannot do professional development during a prep period or common planning time. So all of that has to be taken in consideration when you're thinking of introducing technology and applications in a school environment. You just can't fall in love with the technology.
That reminds me of the NSF grant, the Philly Scientist grant we're working on with Dean Songer. We actually have badging with the science curriculum we're doing with the youth, but also for the professional development side of that too. So we're making sure we're hitting both sides of that to make sure that the teachers are really ready to utilize that curriculum too. So that I'm really interested to see how that's going to play out.
What's fun is when it's the same badges, right? I mean, like, so for example, I look at the makerspace up at SLA Bieber, and the badges that the teachers get to get certified, to be able to use the tools, is the exact same badge and actually the exact same process that the kids get certified on it. So before you can use, you know, the lathe, and it doesn't matter if you're 15 or 50, your process for being certified and like, yes, we trust you not to cut your hand off, is the same. And I think that's actually like where we can see adult learning and kid learning on the same human continuum of learning is really profoundly powerful. I worry sometimes that a lot of times we go like, well, you know, like it's that whole notion, be one school, right? If you want your kids to learn a certain way, then you have to expect that that is also valuable for the adults. And sure, there's some differences and what have you, we're at different parts of that human continuum, but you see adult learning and teacher and student learning as people see them as completely different beasts, which I think is a mistake. And I think that to that end, you know, that I think the other thing that we see a lot of times with these big companies is this idea that they know best how to use their own tool. And right, one of my favorite Neil Postman lines is, the inventor of tool is never the best arbiter of its use. And so how you create the space for students, teachers, users to invent their own use case becomes, I think, really powerful also.
I think the system, there's a model that's broken here, and I'm going to say something, but I don't necessarily believe that I think this should happen, but I'll throw it out there. So if I want to take a drug, if I want to sell a drug, if I'm a drug company, I can't just go sell you a drug. It has to go, a textbook, I can't just write a textbook. So right now, and I write software, and I've sold software into schools without going through, a system. But oftentimes, we do spend a lot of time in trying to study the effectiveness of our systems, but most big creators of technology don't have to do that. And so that system is broken, and I think part of the challenge is also with schools of ed, where oftentimes we're not in the space where we're studying, technologies are black boxes. We're not necessarily understanding really how these things are designed such that our studies can really get at, the effectiveness of the technology. So we have to figure out some type of system and process that benefits teachers and schools of ed of being able to do some of that work, but also holds big companies accountable for the, because you can, so I'm not saying anything negative about Khan, but all of a sudden it's like, well, Khan, it was viewed, we saw Khan did effective, Bill Gates liked it, and then all of a sudden everybody in the world, okay, but all of a sudden everybody in the world wanted to get on Khan, right, without necessarily there being, here's some study that it needs to be effective. So we have to figure out some system, but at the same time, I'm not saying that it has to say, well, we've proven, I don't want to do this randomized control. So there has to be something that we can come up with before someone goes to a teacher and then the teacher spending all this money on using something that is not effective. So we can do better.
And I think just what's cool is what came out of the Department of Ed under the Obama administration in the Office of Educational Technology is the rapid cycle protocol work, right? Like the RCP work that Richard Collada and our friend Zach Chase and Katrina Stevens was doing really actually started to move towards that. Like, how do you rapid cycle this stuff such that it's not a 10-year lag of research or the product or the research that costs more than the development of the app. I think the other thing we've got to be super careful about with schools is that everybody's viewing schools as a market. And, when a company comes in and says, promises you the freemium version of something and then upsells or goes out of business and all the rest of that, parents and students don't go to the failed company to yell. They go to the principal because we're the ones who brought it into the building. So the other piece is, how do we understand, if we have to accept, and it pains me to say this, but if we have to accept that there is an education, quote unquote, market, how do we work with the vendors in such a way that they understand that the delicacy of that market is very, very, very different than other spaces? Because the cost of failure or the cost of success and then the failure of the product or any of these things is really quite great.
We should get paid as a developer. We should get micro payments. Let me pay for how often it gets used. So if I have a good system, if I'm Math Blaster and you use me 1,000,000 times, then I should get paid for that. If I'm something else, Math Blaster bad, you don't use me, and why should I pay for it up front? So I think there's some really creative ways. If we think about how we pay for music and things like that, we can be creative such that the person who does a good quality product that is showing impact and showing use is actually receiving funds, as opposed to someone who has a good marketing campaign and was able to, and knows someone who's able to get it into use.
I would have Google Docs $7 billion.
Yeah. I want to add one thing to this too, that in that rapid programming cycle that you talked about, one of the problems are that there are not enough test beds when their companies are rolling out their systems, and they're not testing in enough markets, if you will. So then, especially when you talk about urban education centers, so are you testing it in a small, comprehensive neighborhood high school, mid-size, large-size high school? Are you testing it in a magnet school, a charter school? Are you testing it in a CTE school? Are you testing it solely in suburban schools and then expecting that it's going to work the same way in an urban setting? All of those things have to be taken into consideration. And a lot of times going through that rapid recycling, and full disclosure, I spent 18 years in technology before I changed careers, right? So I know the dark side, if you will. And, and there's always taking it to market, and there's always that pressure, taking a system to market. But in the education space, as educators, we have to push back with technology companies and really push back and say, wait, if you want me to test your software, well, I need to test it for the next 6 months. Because if I'm going to make an investment, I want to make sure that I can use it. I want to be able to use it with students that don't necessarily know how to use technology. I want to use it with teachers that are afraid of technology, and I want to use it in different schools. If you really want me to make that purchase, that's really important. So us as educators, we have to push back many times, and we don't, because we want the latest and the greatest as well.
So let's change topics just a little bit here. So we've talked about digital badging a lot here, and I'm curious how you can talk about the role of digital badges and that they play in regards to equitable learning itself. So how do badges play into equitable learning?
In multiple ways. So one is, I think, at least how we've tried to do the digital badges in some of Chicago, is that first you have to make public what your expectations are, right? And if you attach the work to it, then we have the ability, even as a professional development tool, to have a conversation around, well, okay, these are the requirements that are in this badge, and this is what you awarded. So let's talk about, are the expectations meeting? So like I have a digital divas. If I'm giving out a lot of badges, and if you go look at the work, and the work doesn't meet the expectation, then how can I be held accountable? I should be able to be held accountable, right? So we have to figure, and so what I've always wanted to do badging, and why we did it, was to get to that point, not about I have a portfolio of 100 badges or this is going to get me into college, but much more as a way to create a common language where we have work product and we can see how students and teachers and after-school providers are using that, have a shared understanding of what the criteria is and awarding badges for it. So then we can look to say, well, oh, that really is an interesting program, or not funding me because it's Nicole Pinker's program, but hey, you can look at the portfolio of work and see that the work that we've produced for the Digital Divas is quality enough that you want to fund it. Right? As opposed to right now, if you think of how funding happens, it's much more about who can write the proposal. And so equity of funding doesn't happen because the people oftentimes in the community who are really doing the work don't have someone on their team who can write those big grants. So if we can begin to say, let's hold you accountable by the quality of the work you produce, but that creates a whole, you have to have a good ecosystem, good relationships. That's not something you turn on from day one. That's something you have to develop over time before you begin to attach funding to it. So we've done a little bit of it. I think there's a long way to go. But you have to be willing, in that you also then have to be willing to not give kids badges. Right? Yeah. The biggest thing with digital badges is if you feel that you have to award it, then you get into a problem.
When badges become candy, right?
Yeah, everything you say, I second, because the badges have to have value. And they have to have value not only to students, but who's curating the badges, right? And I'll give you an example. We created early childhood education curriculum with one of your professors here from Drexel, Dr. Dominic Gulo. And so high school students that are interested in learning early education. So, and students work toward their CDA, their Child Development Associate's credential. So what we did was we looked at that curriculum, and we have internships over the summer where we place students that are interested in early childhood education in early child education centers for 6 weeks. So for the four days out of the week, they're working in these centers. On the 5th day, we bring them into our offices where we have 25 kids, which is really an interesting set of dynamics, but they're learning, and we created a playlist based on the curriculum that they're learning in school and based on the feedback from the experts in the field of early childhood education. So they're learning of fire safety, FEMA preparedness, CPR, nutrition, and so forth. And each week they have to demonstrate competency. And each week we have a content expert that comes in and speaks to them. So they're learning from an expert, and then they're maybe doing an online module, and then they're demonstrating that they've learned competency. At the end of the 6th week, that's when they actually earn a badge. And they've put in 18 to 20 hours during those 6 weeks, and those 20 hours goes toward their credentials. So there's real value and real merit to the badges. So you have to make it, it has to have merit, it has to have meaning for the students, but also equally it has to mean something in the industry. You just can't create a badge because it's a cool thing to do. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of thinking.
Right. I think, and the important thing though is, I think also when we do say these things, is that when it is robust, when it is of value, we do create the conditions by which the existing world, especially in the world of STEM, if they have to acknowledge that a badge has meaning and value, then we create the condition by which kids who have long been denied access to the world of STEM can walk in with that credential, right? And we shouldn't forget that piece of that puzzle as well, right? That ability for me to say, like, that, like, yeah, I went to SLA Bieber, which has this incredibly amazing makerspace, and I've got 15 badges on the different things that I can do there. So now when I'm walking into a college, or what have you, I can say, here are the things I'm really good at already, and because of the worth that has been placed on those badges, kids who've been denied access to that world now have to be taken much more seriously. So I think that is the promise of it.
To add to this, and really about the equity standpoint, really picking off what Chris said, right now, part of the challenge is you have to know about the opportunity to be able to take advantage of the opportunity. With digital badges, and I'll give you an example of what we've done in Chicago. We do a Grammy, we do a camp with Grammy. So Grammy comes every year, and they do a Grammy camp with Grammy artists. So before it would be, well, let's put it up on the website and see who wants to apply. Now we're like, okay, who are the kids who've earned a digital badge related to music over the last year? They get the first, we push out to them, hey, here's this opportunity. They get the first opportunity to register to the program. Then whatever is not, then it's opened up to the public. So you could begin to start using that as a way to push opportunities and sort of model how you engage in opportunities for kids, as opposed to assuming that they have a broker or someone at home who can do that for them.
Do you have a concern, do you have a concern though, because like we've seen this problem of the capacity problem, which creates a different equity problem, right? So let's say that your digital badging for your music programs are amazing and you've got tons of folks doing it. Then how do you make sure that entry is still accessible to all, so that way a kid who may not have done the digital thing yet still has access to Grammy. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. So this is why it's an ecosystem, and right, it's really important to have these data systems that allow you to see the inequity. So if you look at those badges and say, well, oh, the music badges are taking place over here and that not equitably distributed, then in that sense, I wouldn't take that Grammy opportunity and use badging for it. So the same thing we say with parks. We know that in Chicago, from age of 2 really to 12 to 13, when you can stay at home by yourself. most kids, particularly lower socioeconomic kids, spend time in the parks because it's cheap and for summer camp. So I'm okay with saying, hey, if you want a summer job in parks in high school, you probably needed to have earned a badge you might needed to go to parks because we know everyone is accessible. I wouldn't say if you had to have, gone to a specialized, you had to participate in U.S. First Robotics. Right. Because I know that that's not an opportunity that's equitably available. So I think as you look at the data and you figure out where you have your tipping points and where you feel like something is equitable, then I think putting that out as an expectation and a milestone to access something is beneficial because you know it's accessible and it's helping kids go down the line, but you have to set up that infrastructure.
Right.
Sorry if I took your job there for a second.
Oh, that's fine with me. I get paid either way. So.
Wait, I was going to say.
No water.
That's right, there we go. That's good water.
I wanted to echo as well the LRG Philly system. We're working with the Work Ready Summer Youth Employment Program here in Philly, and one of the things we're trying to find is that we have youth that come back 2 to 3 years, and if you have that opportunity there, so if they've earned a badge that first year, maybe that gives them the opportunity then to get another higher sought after job. They have that we recognize you have certain skills and that you might be more qualified for a different job, and that kind of plays into some more creates competitiveness in the program and makes students want to earn those skills too. So, well, time is up for our questions here. So we are looking now for for questions from the audience. If there's any questions here, we got one over here, I think. Yep. Yeah, the microphones are coming around here, so we.
Yes. So I just wanted to build on that, the out-of-school time learning and sort of the maker space things happening outside of schools and having badges. I know there's a big push now for expanded learning opportunities and credit-bearing learning opportunities outside of schools that would supplant credit earned within schools, and there would be funding implications for that. And obviously, I'm sure Chicago and Philadelphia were in a very precarious situation with our funding. So the idea of pushing like really cool programs into out-of-school time settings where you can earn credit then becomes very regressive within underfunded school communities. And it could be penalizing public schools for not being able to access funding when children are not in schools. I know there's something, Ohio has a credit flexibility program called Hackable High School, and you can set up a custom learning contract and like do many different things. As long as you're demonstrating a competency, you can get school credit. And it's very low-key right now, but I see with the growth in like austerity situations, this idea of badging and having cool projects that are not embedded within a school system could essentially, in the long term, be very inequitable in terms of having people navigate ecosystems. So I'm just wondering what you thought.
So I have two responses to that. So part of what we're trying to do, the model I talked about, the after-school model we're doing, is trying to recognize that the reality of the finances are the way they are. Chicago's probably about to potentially shut down in June because we don't have the money. So it's not realistic for us to say, put these programs in the school. But what is realistic is to say we can access the kids from the school. So in that sense, what we do is we work with the school, the leaders, to say, okay, get your kids registered into these programs. We pick them up, bring them back to the school. We then work with the school to understand what kids have learned. So in that sense, we're extending the school day. And where that model for us came from when we spent time in Spain and in Italy, and we're talking about informal learning out, and I was like, well, we have after school. And they're like, what do you mean after school? They're like, well, our kids don't get out till 5 o'clock. And they're like, well, what time do your kids get out? I'm like, they get out at 2:15. They're like, what do you mean they get out at 2:15? They're like, are parents off? No, they're not off. They're like, so you've created this whole world. Everyone looked at us like we were crazy. They're like, no one else has this concept of after school. Kids stay in school.
But I guess it's more the credit flexibility piece. Are you guys comfortable with that? Like, I'm just curious if you're aware of it.
I'm comfortable.
So I mean, I think that if we get to a place where someone says, oh, this kid earned this credit in this thing, so we're going to take away your funding for it because they already got that credit, yeah, then we're in a horrible place. I mean, there's no question about that. I think the mistake, what I hope instead happens is people start to understand that instead we can look at this as the richness of everything a child learns during their school-age years. I agree with you completely that this could be used for harm. I think that we can hopefully prevent that. I think we can also look, I think the other thing that we can start to do if we're smart as far as school is concerned is start to look at what are the skills, what are the talents that are getting developed in these after-school spaces, and how can they be made relevant and powerful inside school, right? I mean, a kid who is doing a digital film program should be making documentaries in a history class if they want to, right? A kid who is coding should be having the opportunity to develop simulations in a physics classroom if they so choose to.
It just seems like a lot of the supports for these programs are not necessarily coming from unionized teachers, certified teachers, they're mentors, they're maybe online folks.
But they're
like
trained.
gig economy types of, and in terms of
but-
economic sustainability.
I think we can respectfully disagree with that, but part of the challenge is, to me, is if you make it all in school, and particularly for the population I'm working with, where everybody in their family has not gone to college, if everything is situated in school, then I don't understand the utility and relevance of what you're teaching me in school and after school. So we really try to say, we now can talk about learning, and let's connect in school and out of school. And for me, let's say for coding, I'm going to get credit for coding out of school, but someone else next to me needs to take the class in school. So there shouldn't be one pathway. There should be multiple different pathways to give credit for things. So the situation we're in, as an example, Chicago passes a law that says every kid needs to take coding by the time they graduate. So from the traditional approach, that's going to say we now have to find 500 teachers and train them to teach coding, as opposed to saying, hey, let's be creative about this. So I think there has to be a both-and solution, and it should not take money away from schools. It should allow schools to use the money that they have, but we actually have money that's coming into these other spaces, and how can we make sure that they're helping to relieve some of the
It's just a
burdens
challenge,
of
because I think the American Alliance of Museums has a report from 2014 sponsored by the Ford Foundation saying museums and cultural institutions are sort of realizing this crisis point, and they're really great at programs, and they're sort of waiting, like when schools die, they'll be the people. And that's in the future of education. So I'm just wondering, is it incumbent on these community cultural spaces, maker spaces, to say, we are always intended to support our neighborhood schools and support those learning experiences, not at their expense? And at one point, so
I want to make sure we also get to some of the other questions. Yeah.
I'm just going to add one thing, because I think, Nicole, you really touched on it with your slides when you first started about an ecosystem, and where we learn in multiple ways, and we don't all learn everything in school. I did not learn technology. I programmed in about 11 different languages at one time, maybe more. But I didn't learn that in school. By the time, and I'm that old, I can admit it, by the time computer science got really strong, I had been programming for years. So everything I learned outside of school. So to make an assumption that everything you're going to learn in school is a fallacy. So everything can't be credit-bearing, and we have to recognize the ecosystem. Because a lot of what Nicole is doing and what we're doing, I'm a nonprofit, and we work with other nonprofits in the education space, but we also respect the school districts. They have their set of rules and responsibilities, and we do as well. So it's very complicated, and funding streams get really, really messy.
And just one last thought, wealthy folks have been doing that forever. Yes. Right, that's the other piece of the puzzle, right? Like, if your parents had money, you had your learning supplemented, right? I learned, I'm the child of a teacher and a lawyer, of a union lawyer, so we were solidly middle class. And so in the early 1980s, my parents found, a community college program where they were teaching people to code, on Saturday mornings, and put their young kid in it. And they had the access and the finances to be able to do such a thing. So I think we also have to recognize that if we don't want all of our new technologies to reify all of the inequities of our society, then we need to provide out-of-school opportunities for those families who don't have access to them, whether that's for cultural, geographic, financial reasons. And that becomes a really important part of this puzzle as well.
We had a question over here? Yeah.
First of all, thank you for the discussion. And secondly, Dr. Pinker, thank you for the presentation around this version of programming and moving it into communities where it's under-resourced, so that, in fact, those young people can get access. My question is, how do teachers and developers get to know the context of the students they serve? Context matters. what we do, context always matters. And so when technology is employed, it is it appropriate, and does it generate innovation from students and educators to serve and close the gap on inequity that can serve the communities from where the students come?
Oh, can I? So, great question, and I think it can. I think the mistake is when it is, technology can humanize or dehumanize, and I think we have to be incredibly intentional in understanding when it is a humanizing factor and when it is a dehumanizing factor. If we think technology replaces people, then it is going to do harm, right? And I think instead, when we understand how technology can be used to better connect us, to better help us know each other in really powerful ways, I think that's what's really important, right? I mean, what we have seen since it got easier for teachers to give their cell phone numbers to kids, and for a kid to be able at 8 o'clock at night to text a teacher, hey, I'm stuck on I'm stuck on this thing, can I text you with my question, right? Like, that's a really humanizing thing. I think also if we assume that there's some technology on high that is just this content delivery system, then I think technology is really dehumanizing. I think that the power of technology is not that we can deliver content, but rather actually that our students can become content creators themselves, right? That's where the power lies. And when we as the adults, when we as the teachers ask the questions, like, what do you think of this? What do you need to make this happen? How are you feeling that you're doing these things? And we're not abdicating our roles as educators. Then we're putting the tools in the hands of the kids to do amazing things, and we're doing the work alongside of them, with them. And I think that's unbelievably humanizing, because we will learn the kids' contexts by the content they create. And I think that's really powerful. I know I don't want to do that.
No, but I think
Any
that's
other questions? Yeah.
That was a really good question, and I do think that one of the things, if you think about mentoring, so in our work, you very seldom would see a kid always on the computer. If you saw the video, oftentimes the computers are documenting things, or you're accessing a quick video for something, but the whole experience is a combination of interacting with each other, right? You might spend some time, even coding oftentimes, there's side-by-side coding, or let me share what it is that you do. So I think the technology is never in the first position. It serves a particular role. And also it serves a role for a teacher to be able to go backwards. Oh, this kid is going to be in my class. Let me see what it is that they've actually been able to do.
I just add one quick thing, too, that I saw data not too long ago that by 2018, 2019, we're going to be adding 1.5 million new tech jobs, right? And only 27% of that will be filled by females. And we've seen over the years less and less women going into technology. So when you were talking about introducing it in middle schools, there's an organization here called Tech Girls that does the same thing. We work with them. In fact, they're training our high school students so that our high school girls can teach middle school girls, right? So, and we also have Sylvester Mobley here in town who is doing coding for kids. And he started in rec centers, and working primarily with young men of color. And I'm talking about 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. And he started with one kid. And then he's now in multiple rec centers. He's working in schools. So there's these pockets taking place. But it's really important that we're recognizing these populations that get often ignored. Here in Philadelphia, until very recently, most of the kids who live in public housing have no internet access. That's no mistake. And I happen to have worked for Annie Casey Foundation for some years. And across the country, you found poor neighborhoods, especially African-American communities and Latino communities, where they were redlined. So that is an issue that's only being addressed now. So the assumption that we got kids that have smartphones is wrong too. Because we have a lot of kids that don't have smartphones, don't even have phones, or they share one smartphone. Exactly. So, but we need to address those inequities. And unfortunately, it's too big a problem for school districts to address alone. That's why you have these nonprofits and organizations that are providing resources that are just not in the school. There are just not enough there's just not enough money to do this just within the school system. So you have to look outside of the community, look into the community, I should say, for supports.
Hello, I'm Rakina Laurel, and I would love to thank Drexel for helping me through college. I'm a licensed cosmetologist, I'm an author, and I attend a program, the Consortium. I've been here for several years. And I've been with the Dornside Drexel Center, and they did a lot for us, such as taking us to the ATC Busby Farm. We did the eggplant search for full abundance. In addition to, I did a free history class, as you spoke about that. We went to the Fine Arts Academy in town. In addition to, it's a free music recording classes that are starting, and I signed up for those. Yet my question is, how much is the tuition to attend Drexel for a year? Thank you.
I think it's 50, I think all in, it's right around $50,000 a year.
It's, well, all in, it might be, yeah.
Yeah.
Tuition itself is around $34,000 to $35,000 for tuition. I know my daughter's a junior right now, so as we're looking into that. So, yeah. And that is actually common across the board for a lot of the schools I'm looking at, too. So higher education tuition is just incredibly. Now, do kids actually pay that amount? No. It's often, tuition is often inflated. Most youth actually get some sort of financial aid. I'm not sure how equitable that financial aid is across the board.
So I can have a quick response. So 50% of Drexel students, the average student has 50% rate of financial aid. Is that right?
Yeah.
So anyway, there's a lot of financial aid. There's also very interesting programs for people that are born and raised and go to school in Philly. There are special scholarships just for Philly residents. So there's a lot of effort, even though we recognize that those are not nearly enough effort to really bridge the kind of ridiculous price tag that we are all a part of. So I take your question as an important question for us to keep in mind, that we still really haven't solved that problem in a larger sense. And I think that's maybe what you were referring to. Sorry? Oh, it's the library. I don't know anything about access to the library and how others get that.
I have access to the library, and that's very accommodating also.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
This question comes from online. This is from John Hall. He asked, many sponsors of mentoring programs do not find a return on investment for their mentoring programs. Can you please quantify what has been the industry validation for the programs in Chicago and Philadelphia?
So in Chicago, our definition of mentoring is not big brother, little sister mentoring, where we say, okay, let's put you together. It's really more side-by-side learning. So a mentor is, you go to the basketball, it's a coach. They're demonstrating their skill set, and then you decide, I want to work with our mentor because, hey, you're great at what you do. Then in the act of working together, learning how to do something, you develop that personal relationship. And some mentors and peers some mentors and students develop more like a big brother, little sister conversation, and they can talk a lot more, and sometimes they actually don't. What we've seen in our work in the libraries, in the U-Media space, is oftentimes it's the circulating clerk at the desk who knows every single kid because they're there at all the different times. I think Chicago has a very robust mentoring model in that term of the model, but one of the challenges is there's no human capital pipeline. So if you say, I really want to work with youth, the same way you as a teacher, you can go get a job. There really isn't a pipeline you can say, I want to spend my career, unless you end up in management. You can't really, you're not going to make, economically. So that's one big issue we have to address, is how to turn mentor from a volunteer concept actually into a real career path that people can develop and understand that, particularly if all of our kids are getting out of school at 2 o'clock and they need to be in someone's hands to be, I didn't mean it that way, they need to be educated. Okay.
That's a very different path.
Okay, right. Right, and so I think in that sense, but I can say this from the socioeconomic standpoint of the cost structure, we end up with like a 1 to 12 model, but also using many universities where students have, like DePaul University students have to spend 10 weeks doing service, so students do the service. And then the final part of the model is high schoolers in the summer serve as camp counselors, mentors for, middle school kids. And so you figure out the chain and the link where you put the quality of mentor in front of you that you actually need.
And I believe the Parks and Rec here is actually recognizing the work that youth do as they go through certain sports programs, as they're playing as a young child in a sports, then they grow, as they get older, maybe they're helping coach a younger team as well. And they're actually working on a program to actually recognize students as they kind of go through there and kind of reward them through their mentorship there too.
So I'm going to say a couple things, which is number one, not everything's ROI. Right? I mean, if the only reason a business is going to mentor a group of high school kids is the hope is that, 8 years later, one of the 50 that you mentored over that time ended up working for your company, you're doing it wrong. Yay, that'd be awesome, right? And we have programs like that at SLA where we actually have, for example, we have, and I'll shout it out as a way that it's doing it right, is Braskem has taken on SLA kids as mentors in their sophomore year. They have the opportunity to take a larger group in the sophomore year, it whittles down a little bit in the junior year, they stay with them for their senior capstone, and then they actually, if they get all the way through that, then promise them summer jobs, da-da-da-da-da-da. But realistically, they can do that for 1 or 2 kids a year who get the full pipeline, but there's a whole other group of people that they work with, a whole other group of kids they work with just because it's a great thing to do. I also think there are some studies that show corporations that make time for their employees to give back to the communities have higher rates of satisfaction, higher rates of retention. So there is an ROI to being a company that recognizes you live in the world and that you have an obligation to that world. And I think that is a really important piece of the puzzle. If it's got to turn into a dollars and cents thing, I mean, I'm a high school principal. I don't got the kind of time to do that research for you. And if that's and literally, if you come to us with what's our if we take an internship, what's our ROI? Chances are I'm going to tell you that you're not someone we want to work with.
I have a question. We're currently living in a changing political context, and I wonder how that's fine. I wonder how notions of equity have changed within the different perspectives that you're working in, and how you adjust those within the communities that you serve.
I'm going to let you take that one.
Oh, man!
So I grew up in Kansas City, Kansas, Midwest, and when the whole election happened, I mean, I spent some time back at home, and I'm like, Kansas is a very different place. Kansas City, Kansas is a very different place when I grew up. So the reality of oftentimes, we I think is critical that we focus on the issues of, urban issues, but we also have to focus and acknowledge the issues of the changing of what's taking place in rural communities, not even just rural, but Midwestern and Rust Belt things. So I think that is a fair way in that if I think about the times I've sat on review boards for NSF and things like that, often you aren't seeing the proposals from coming about how do you address beyond, definitely you have rural and you have urban. You really don't have Rust. I don't think there is a category in some sense that talks about that. So I think it raised the issue, and we collectively have to think about it. And we also have to think about how do we realize our differences within the community. So we have a project where we're saying let's connect kids to Morocco, right? And we then worked with kids. We brought kids from across all of Chicago. And we realized actually the kids in Chicago had more. They learned so much by talking to the kids in Chicago. They also learned a lot by talking to the kids in Morocco, but they didn't realize how different they were from each other, right? So the South Side and the West Side, it's like, oh, wow, I hadn't even thought about that. And so we're like, wait a minute, we need to be doing some exchanges also within our own communities and not necessarily also thinking about just doing outside of it. So I think we have to complexify our understanding of needs and understand that it's not all around just in urban, it's not all rural, that we have multiple different types of communities that we, given the changes in technology that's taking place, everyone is being displaced, and we have to acknowledge that and come up with solutions that address everyone's needs.
As a white guy of privilege, I have to say, one of the things that I've noticed changing is, coming into work after the election, seeing how sad and crying people were. They were so upset about that. And then Saturday Night Live really put it to rest in a skit that they had, Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock showing up to an election party with other white folks there, and seeing the people just being appalled, saying, this is the worst that America's ever had it, and they kind of look at him like, this is the worst? What are you talking about, you know? It really kind of put perspective to me into that as well. So I feel like that kind of change has happened a little bit for me on my end.
But I also want to acknowledge the real reality, right? Title I, Title II goes away, we're in a lot of trouble, right? I mean, like, there's a very real reality as well, which is that in a time in Philadelphia where I actually found a blog entry that I wrote about the Philadelphia fiscal crisis from '07, right? And I look back at now, and like in my head, I'm like, '07 was the salad days. We had so much money then, it was great, you know? So we've been, like, we normalized the doomsday budget. And, you know, if we're now at a place where this gets worse, this is the body blow the system can't take, right? And, you know, Nicole already said, you know, Chicago's going like, can we keep paying people? And Philly's never more than a half step behind that. We're in good financial, and thank you, Uri Manson, for writing our financial ship with what we've got. Our CFO's brilliant. But, like, we know what our lead time is until we're back in the red. And if the federal government makes it worse, then all of this stuff we're talking about, like how do in-school, out-of-school partnerships work? How do we collaborate on these things? How do we make sure that we're supporting one another's work? When everybody's fighting over the crumbs at the table, that gets all harder. And I think we have to understand that this is a moment where, for those of us who believe in doing the work, whatever part of the sector you're in, how we stand strong for fighting for enough for all of us to do this work, knowing that if we're in an urban system, it's never going to be enough. That's going to be, like, we better get some alliances going in a hurry. And I think that's a really, really big piece of this puzzle. How do we work together to hold on to the gains we've made as far as the kinds of collaboration and partnerships we've had?
I want to take it in a slightly different direction in terms of, you know, we hear the term fake news all the time, right? And you know, we have these really smart devices, and we're not using them. We're not teaching young people, we're not teaching educators how to use smart devices, how to be critical thinkers, how to really evaluate what you're reading, who's the source, where is it coming from, right? And we don't teach civics like we used to, you know, so all of that is compounded by what both speakers just mentioned. So we need to take it apart from multiple perspectives, because if we're going to address the issues of equity, you know, we have to look at it from every perspective, because we are being attacked from many different ways. And we collectively need to pay attention and be vocal, and we need to use the technologies that are at our disposal to communicate with one another. You know, it can be a great leveling if we're reaching out across, you know. I was in Tampa the day that the elections, I made sure I got my vote in, and I was sitting in this hotel, and they were having a party because everyone thought Hillary was going to win. And when the shock hit, everyone in that room it was like dead silence, and there were people of every nationality, every race, every creed in that room. And for me, it softened the blow just a little bit, because it humanized for me that I wasn't the only one experiencing the shock. And it enabled me to continue to have a conversation with folks that I might not necessarily agree with. And I use technology when I talk to people, and I've worked across the country, so I have friends all over. So I make sure I continue conversations, even with folks who voted for the other guy, okay? Because it's important that we're constantly listening, but we need to use technology to reach out and make sure that we don't just stop communicating with people who have different ideas.
Well, I think we're going to let Jay have the last word on that one. So I think we're good for tonight. So thank you so much. Oh, one more? I'm sorry. Didn't see you there. Go ahead. Yeah.
Mr. Bassett, you've spoken about testing for specific populations, or testing over some population. I'm wondering about at-risk students in terms of they usually engage less in class and also less in online platforms with technology in schools. From the programs you talked about, have you experienced any success reaching at-risk students, and what facets are you using in those programs that could be added to the classroom?
I mean, I guess I just don't have those challenges. Our students engage the content, they engage in the online platforms. They've done very well in that sense. Because I think I think it's less about the student, it's much more around the context of the learning environment and what the expectations are set and what's modeled for them. So I'm not implying that it doesn't happen in that sense. I'm just saying in the context of the work that we've been fortunate to do, we haven't had the challenges with students not engaging in online platforms. But I don't use systems like, I'm not putting them on Khan and saying, go sit in front of here and do this. We're always creating constructivist project base where they're collaborating and they're using technology to demonstrate their understanding of something as opposed to sit here and learn this. Now, but let me be clear, if you remember the basketball, there's drills. Sometimes you do have to learn that stuff, but oftentimes that's, they're doing that one-on-one and things like that. We're not spending the whole entire class time to do that.
I also haven't encountered that, and I've been in a lot of different settings. I've worked with different populations across the country with technology, right? And I always find what Nicole said to be very true, especially young children. I don't care what nationality, what race. They always engage quickly, And a lot of the kids that I've worked with over the years have great literacy challenges. But when you're talking about technology and you use technology in a way to teach them coding, that is a great equalizer. It really, you don't see the challenges that teachers see when they're trying to work with students in complex subjects where literacy counts. And when it comes to technology, if it's deployed correctly and if you really have good instructors who are very engaging, that's really, you just got to point kids in the right direction. They'll shock you more times than not. And what's really cool about technology is that you're teaching them how to code, right? But you're not telling them what to code, right, Nicole? You're just, you're pointing them in a direction. And then they'll surprise you with the websites they develop, some of the apps they develop, and it's amazing some of the things they come up with. And I say, wow, someone can market that, and they're learning different skills,
And, and if I may, I think one of the hallmarks of what Nicole does, one of what we try to do with SLA, is we use, again, it's this idea of technology to humanize, not dehumanize, right? So much of I loved the web of connectivity that Nicole showed for her programs and the mentor at the center of it, right? The problem that we see with MOOCs or what have you is it actually takes technology and has less human interaction, not more. Right, same thing with Khan Academy. It's great, I can follow my own learning, but to what end and why, and where's the person who cares for me, right? When we leverage technology to allow more human interaction, not less, that's what's really powerful, right? When your teacher, whether it's in an online mentorship or whether it's you're doing something, you are in a constructivist moment, you're building something, you're coding, you're making a movie, you're writing, you're whatever, and your teacher's sitting next to you, not lecturing you from the front of the room, that's when those kids who feel disengaged feel re-engaged because we're able to leverage human connection. And the technology can be a tool to do that. Any other way, I think it exacerbates the problems.
That's great. All right, thank you. Yeah.
I think we are at the end of a very fascinating evening. If you could please raise your hands and thank all of our panelists and our guest speaker for a very exciting conversation. We also have some small gifts for you, so don't go away. Our appreciation of your thoughtfulness, your intelligence, and all of the good dialogue we had today. So thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this. Please let us know if you have ideas.